Thank you. Welcome everyone to the third Mayor's Question Time with Andy Burnham. My name is Dan Hewitt. I'm the political correspondent for ITV News Granada Reports. Thank you to everyone here who's come here tonight to Ellesmere High School in Salford, and also to everyone who's tuning in on Facebook, on Twitter, on the Granada Reports Facebook page, and also on Andy's Facebook page. Throughout tonight we'll be taking questions from you guys in the audience here, and also those at home, wherever you're watching on your phones or your iPads or your computers at home. Submit your questions either on Twitter with the hashtag AskAndyGM or in the Facebook comments, and we'll try and get through as many comments as you can on this iPad that I think I know how to work. So the first question tonight to Andy will come. It's two questions into one, so I'll read both your names. So if Paul Keeble and Derek Gibson. If Paul could go first, then Derek.
Hi Andy.
Hi Paul.
Can we as a region opt out of the universal credit rollout until it gets fixed? That's part one.
Good question.
And then from Derek, which is vaguely similar. Is Derek here? Can we see Derek? Yeah.
Hi.
Hi Derek.
Mine is to do with the DWP and the continued harassment of the disabled people with regard to PIP.
Yeah, no. Thank you both for those questions. And as Dan said, thanks to all of you for coming along. Great turnout, so it's much appreciated. I wish I could say it were otherwise, but no, I'm afraid, Paul, is the answer to your question. In many ways, I'm trying to buck the trend and do things differently through devolution and not go with the government agenda, but DWP isn't devolved, I'm afraid to say. What I have been trying to do, though, is to use my voice for you as Mayor of Greater Manchester to say this will cause chaos. It will harm so many people if they proceed with this rollout. I'll give you a couple of stats. You know, we've had pilot areas in Greater Manchester for universal credit. Oldham, Wigan. Wigan found that universal credit, for those who went on it, left 80% of people in rent arrears. 80. And of those people in arrears, the arrears were much higher than they would ordinarily be on any other benefits. You know, you're talking 4 times higher, so over £1,000. So my argument to the government is, what is the point of a pilot if you're just going to ignore the evidence like that? And I raised that directly with the Prime Minister when she came to Greater Manchester a few weeks ago. I've done it nationally, but no, sadly, if they choose to plough on, this is going to hurt a lot of people here. It's going to put more and more people in the doorways of Greater Manchester sleeping rough. There's just no getting away from that. It was put to me that rough sleeping may double if this goes ahead. So I would just encourage all of you, I don't know if people share the concern about it. I'm not saying this from a party political point of view, I'm just saying it in terms of the evidence that I have been given from people in the know who work here. If it goes forward, it will damage a lot of lives. And so we can't just sit back and let it happen. Colleagues in Parliament are beginning to challenge it more effectively. Greater Manchester MP Debbie Abrahams, who's the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, done brilliant work, and I think pressure's building, but we still need to see real changes here. Not just a change from an average waiting time of 6 weeks to 4 weeks. Because still, you know, 4 weeks, you can't wait 4 weeks, can you? It feels like it's just dreamt up in an office in Whitehall as though that fits their life, but it's not in the real world, is it? It's going to mean that people get in a spiral of debt that they just can't then get out of, and the damage that then causes. On the PIP point, I know you speak for many disabled people when you say that, you know, the kind of feeling is of a punishment regime, isn't it? Trying to kind of catch people out. The best answer I could give you is I think we've got to make an argument for the devolution of the DWP budget. The national tick box sanctions-based approach is just not working, is it? It doesn't work for people. It's so remote. It's not really about helping people. It seems to be about catching them out, as I say. And I think Greater Manchester should make an argument for the devolution of the DWP budget, because if we had control of it and we could use our charities and voluntary organisations to deliver support, I think we could spend that money so much better. So I don't have immediate answers for either of you, but you know, I'm very much in spirit with the concerns that you're raising.
Yesterday we saw tax credits and the rollout of tax credits when you were in government, when Labour were in government, and she talked about how rushed out, the problems were kind of ignored, and that meant that many years later people were sent letters in the post saying, you owe us several £1,000s. She made the point that you have to kind of tweak the system, but to pause it, to stop it, would actually cause more damage to people. You've called for a pause. Do you mean a pause of the further rollout, or do you mean a pause of people who are on it now? And if so, what would that mean in terms of them receiving payments? Because there isn't a system for them to go back on, is there?
No, I think I'm saying put the whole thing on hold now. Don't roll this out when the evidence is saying that it's going to be very damaging to families, to children, lead to more rough sleeping, family breakdown. Just don't do it. Stop it here. Fix the problems and then go forward. I'm not against the principle, I've always said that. Let's pick up the Prime Minister's point about tax credits. Yes, there were problems. And I'm not going to sit here and say there never were under Labour. Of course there were. There always are when you bring in a big change in the benefit system. The difference with that, of course, is that was more about giving people too much money and then trying to get it back from them rather than not giving them any and then leaving them in a spiral of debt. I think it's still better to perhaps give too much and get it back rather than leave people with nothing.
True, but for those people who would have had to find thousands of pounds from somewhere they didn't have, that would have been quite an ordeal for them.
Of course, and I'm not, as I say, I'm not making a party political point, Dan. My intervention in this debate came from discussions with councils who piloted it, with charities supporting homeless people and rough sleepers, with experts from across Greater Manchester, and the advice I was getting was this will put everything you're trying to do on homelessness completely in reverse. For every one person you help off the streets, there'll be 4 more on with universal credit. So it's a simple plea. You know, no one's arguing against the idea of simplifying benefits and making it more, rewarding work more. No one's arguing with that. What we're saying is the evidence doesn't support the rollout. And when you see evidence like we've got from Wigan and Oldham, the right thing is to stop and fix it before you go any further.
Okay. Any questions relating even kind of broadly to universal credit or the benefit system or homelessness? Question over here. Can we get a microphone down here? If you wait for the microphone, if that's okay, just so people at home can hear you. And just say who you are as well.
Hello, Andy. My name's Dave Minchell. I'm the owner of Joint Veterans Alliance here in Salford. I deal with, as an outreach officer, dealing with veterans and the vulnerable adults here in Salford. We're quite a young company, but one of the issues that you've got is obviously we're going over to this universal credit now, which obviously DWP has changed the policies of different benefits over the years that I've seen since I've come out of the forces. What's happening basically is people who then are on the housing benefits, this is in all cities, not just ours, the time basis it takes to get housing benefits sorted out, and you no guarantee that you're actually going to get this housing benefit. Some people then are actually being left in debt, and therefore, because they can't afford then to get back out of this debt, they're actually losing their homes and finishing up on the streets. As you're aware, obviously, because I know you've been around Manchester quite a lot, we've got people who've been on the streets for quite a period of time now. And the reason that they can't get back onto the system is because the fact is they already owe quite a substantial amount, that where through the DWP and through the housing benefit systems have obviously then lost that chance of having a home. Because of these time bases, and some of them are over 5 years where they've actually been left in this debt, is there not a way of a system that these debts could actually get written off to give these people the chance of going back into society again and actually getting their lives back in order?
Right, it's a good question. Firstly, just a thank you to you for what you do. I was at Broughton House yesterday through the Mayor's Homelessness Fund. We've given them some support to support people who served in the forces. Sadly, there are too many people who've done that who are also homeless on the streets of Greater Manchester. And how that can possibly be right, for people who've done that and then they're left in that position, it's not right for anybody, but particularly wrong in that case. I agree with you. One of the work I've done on homelessness, this problem comes back and back, that through sometimes no fault of their own, people get into a problem with debt and housing arrears because of the late payment, and then because of the interest and everything else, they can't get out of it. They're in a downward spiral and then they're trapped in it. And I think, whereas we take forward our work on homelessness, and it's good that the City Mayor of Salford here tonight, Paul Dennett, who leads on these matters for me as well on housing issues more broadly, is whether we can work across Greater Manchester to kind of allow an approach that doesn't mean people are punished. You know, being in arrears is automatically disqualifying people, and that means they can't kind of break out of the situation that they're in. So I take the point that you're saying. This isn't all for me, though. Of course, some of this is for councils and the policies that they run with regard to housing. But your point is a good one.
Sorry, just a matter of a point of that, because obviously we have MPs that obviously go down. Sorry.
Just wait for the mic, that's all.
I do apologise.
Yeah. It's all right.
Again, sorry, just a continuation with that. We know, obviously, talking to yourself and talking to Paul, you're only within the line of, obviously, the MPs and the House of Lords and everything else. But these are the things that can be taken back to this. What it is you've got throughout the country now, not just veterans, civilians as well, who have got themselves into this spiral.
Yeah.
Because of, it's just say, for instance, the councils, they show your rently statements as a weekly basis, yet housing benefit is paid monthly. It takes up to 12 weeks to get housing benefits sorted out, and in some cases longer. And these people are then sat in a loop, not knowing if they're going to be in debt or they're not going to be in debt, and they finish up on the streets. Now, obviously, from your levels, these are the sort of things that are discussed and then go up to the next stage, and then obviously back down to London, obviously to be resolved. We've obviously got quite a large number, over nearly 4,000 people within the Manchester area, in the Greater Manchester area, who are actually in the homeless situation, either in the hostels or actually on the streets or sofa surfing. And they're your actual numbers, not your statistics that you get on a year-to-year basis, by obviously where we do out the counts, because we all know the counts are wrong. And, you know, and I know you agree with that.
Yeah.
The fact is, obviously, like people
If you
like
could just
myself,
wind up your argument, if you could, just so I can let other people
Right,
in.
okay.
Sorry.
Just on the aspects of that then, basically, if you actually got a lot of these debts written off, which is something that you're never going to get back in the first place, you can actually start to structure what you're looking at doing of trying to eradicate homelessness, which is obviously never going to be done in a month of Sundays. But if you actually reduce 75%, you're more or less by your pledge.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a lot of sympathy for what you're saying, because I think unless you do something to help people wipe the slate, how are they going to get a foundation then to start to rebuild their life? You know, if you don't take that away, that kind of stress and the problems that come with debt, then you don't lift that millstone off their neck. They're not going to be able to then to build a life, are they? So, you know, I've made this commitment around rough sleeping, and we are focusing on that with regard to putting in place support in all communities to mean that there is somewhere for everybody to go. There's a longer term plan that Paul and I are working on around homelessness in Greater Manchester. That's got to be a longer term plan, building more homes for single occupancy, and thinking about the things that you're saying to see if we can have a system that allows people to kind of reset themselves and then rebuild. So, you know, I wouldn't want to say I've got all the answers here tonight, but these commitments are real, and we're going to try and see if we can work with the councils to put in place a much better system of support. The truth is, little bits of bureaucracy in the different systems are tripping people up, and they're falling then through the net because of these things that are just like little delays here and there. Small delays when you've got nothing can mean everything. Well, they can be the difference between having a home and not having a home, can't they? And, you know, not all of it is under our control, and I wouldn't want to sit here and say, oh, I can solve it all, because some of it is national government, some of it is run by councils. What we are trying to do is just make a system here that works better for people and catches them before they fall.
Any other questions around this area? We've got two over here. If you keep your questions relatively short, that is no criticism of you, so it's a very valid point, but I'm trying to get through as many people as possible. If you say your name and your question, please.
My name's Robert Lee. I represent Open Door, Greater Manchester. We're a homeless charity. Now, I've worked on the streets since 1987, and homelessness now is worse than it's ever been, especially in Manchester.
Would you say it's worse in the 80s?
It's worse than the 80s,
yeah.
Now, one of the problems we find with people is we're dealing with the same people all the time. And we'll get them somewhere to live, and they end up back on the streets because of the benefit system. They get penalised because they've had no fixed abode. They get benefits cut, so they can't afford to buy gas or electric or even eat. So they come back out on the streets and they beg. Then they get fined £80 for vagrancy. They can't pay the 80 quid fine, so they end up in jail. They come back out of jail, they've lost their accommodation again. So it's just a vicious circle, and we're dealing with the same people all the time. There needs to be something put in place to secure that tenancy for that person for a period of time, to be able to buy gas, to be able to buy electric, to be able to buy food, instead of having benefits cut and being penalised for being on the backside in life, because it can happen to any of us at any time. There needs to be something put in place.
Was the question, there's another hand up at the back, was it kind of related? Okay, yeah, let's take two at the same time then.
Hello, my name's Andrew Beeper and I run a small charity in Rochdale and Bolton. We house people in the private rented sector. We provide access. The charity is called the Bond Board. I kind of echo the point that was made earlier about rent arrears, but it's actually not the local authorities that make those decisions that exclude people from the houses that everybody said we need built because we have got a housing crisis. It's actually the registered providers that actually exclude people because of the level amount of arrears, and they don't have any limit. They don't have any time limit, it would appear, to actually prevent people because they've got former tenancy arrears. So I think there's a real opportunity here for you, Andy, to actually use your influence with some of the registered providers to look at how they can open up and address some of these issues. And liking on this point, because we've had some contracts offering support to people living in the private rented sector, and right across, it's a national issue, but there isn't the support for people living in these tenancies, for people living on the streets, and it's a real challenge. And this payment by results method, it works sometimes for some people, but it puts a huge risk on the voluntary sector and various organisations trying to deliver.
Yeah. Well, these are really strong points coming out, Dan, and I think I'll bring Paul in on the point about whether we could get registered landlords to work with us on this. It's a really good point. But it's very worrying that you say it's worse than you've ever known it, and you've worked in this area for that long. It's why I've said I'm in the campaign. I said this would be a top priority for me personally, and I mean it. Genuinely, I mean it. I'm going out around the city centre every 3 months. I'm talking to people. I've developed a really clear picture of what's needed, and what is needed is what you've put your finger on. It's too much revolving door, isn't it? It's too sort of temporary, and then it doesn't match up with another bit of bureaucracy, and then people fall through again, or they go in prison and there's no support, and they come out and straight out again, straight back on the streets again. For those who've heard this phrase, I think the answer might be what they call housing first. So, models of support where people get somewhere that is a place they can stay for a period of time, so you take away the worry about accommodation, and then you pile in the other support around support possibly with addiction or with mental health, and then you help people volunteer, and you allow them to rebuild a network and a life with the security of housing behind them. And it's that model that we're looking at around Greater Manchester to see if we can develop more broadly. I'll let Paul come in on the arrears point and landlords, but don't forget the private rented sector as well. The private rented sector is almost completely unregulated, and this is Parliament's fault. Governments of all colours have allowed private landlords pretty much to do what they like. Rake in the housing benefit, don't put any money in the upkeep of the property, leave families living in unsafe, unfit conditions, but then also sometimes just boot them out at a drop of a hat if they get in slightly in arrears. And actually it's evictions from private landlords are the biggest driver at the moment in terms of homelessness. And I would like to do something about that. So I'm talking about a licensing scheme or a regulatory scheme across Greater Manchester Good Landlord Scheme, where we develop a kite mark, which are the basic standards that private landlords should adhere to. For me, it's just a scandal that shouldn't carry on, that they should be raking in all this public money and then behaving in whatever way they choose. It's got to stop, and I think we need to take a stand against it in Greater Manchester.
Can I just add something?
Briefly, if you could.
Yeah, just a really, really brief comment. Because of the exclusions that a lot of people, homeless people face, the private rented sector is the only option, and the only people will house them are private landlords, because some of the registered providers won't house them, the council won't house them, and for some people it really is their only option, especially if they've got former tenancy arrears. They have no choice. So they are driven to the lowest end of the marketplace, and that's because of other policies. Everyone's saying they don't want to deal with people with problems, and that's the issue.
Let's bring in Paul, Mayor of Salford.
Is this on? Yep, great. What we know at the moment is we have...
Do you want to stand up, Paul, or just so people can see you?
Oh, sorry. sorry.
Just so people can
Hello,
see you.
What we know at the moment is we have approximately over 84,000 people on our housing waiting list within Greater Manchester. So that's an indication of the amounts of people who are actually waiting for a home, a social home or a council home within Greater Manchester. I think the issue of debt and rent arrears is a really interesting one, because the precursor for debt and rent arrears isn't just welfare reform. It's also about what's going on in the labour market in terms of people in and out of employment. And obviously we've heard about universal credit and the 6-week wait. That's going to create an absolute catastrophe for people who are in and out of work and on and off, in many respects, the benefit system. I think this issue of debt, though, is much more multifaceted. Yes, we can work with registered providers. We actually meet with registered providers on a regular basis, myself and Andy. The last meeting, one of the things I actually asked them to look at was the impact of welfare reform on their businesses. Registered providers, as many of you know in the room probably, have been experiencing a 1% cut year on year in rents. That's had catastrophic implications for their business plans in terms of retaining staff. It's also had catastrophic implications in terms of them building more social houses or council houses. Government has just changed this. You probably know from the Tory party conference recently, the Prime Minister said that rents, social rents, will be increasing over the next 5 years by CPI plus 1%. Benefits are frozen. They're not linked to inflation. So when we're talking about debt and arrears here, you can see that not only welfare reform and universal credit rollout is part of the problem here, it's the whole welfare system generally. So there is a massive problem going on here. And we do have to work with registered providers to put pressure on those providers to work with people. They do an awful lot of work. I mean, I'm dealing with a case at the moment where a gentleman has got into £3,000 worth of debt and he's been evicted from his home and we're trying to get him back into his social home. So these cases, as far as I can see, when you look at the system in its entirety, this is not even considering personal debt or household debt. I mean, one of the reasons why we've put £180,000 into our credit union this year was very much about trying to tackle payday lenders, the bright houses of this world that rip off people. So, you know, there's an awful lot to think about here when you think about how people get into debt. We'll do what we can with the registered providers to make sure we think about this issue and provide solutions. But I do think we need to think about the complexity here because it is a very complex situation.
Cheers, Paul.
Thanks.
Moving on slightly, but it's kind of been raised in the comments. And thank you to everyone who is submitting comments on the Facebook page and on Twitter. And we will get around to some of those comments in a minute. But just to get a question here from Alan Entwistle, who submitted a question but can't be here. His question was, is the mayoral office capable of stopping Manchester City Council's obsession with rich developers and really making inroads on homelessness and the scrounge of begging in the city of Manchester? I'd probably focus more on the first part of that question because we've covered a lot on homelessness. But that point, is the mayoral office capable of stopping Manchester City's council's obsession with rich developers?
Housing policy is obviously the responsibility for each council individually, and I don't want to kind of pretend I've got powers that I haven't got. You know, those are decisions for councils. What the question might be pointing to is a fund that was set up under devolution, where the government basically said only large private sector organisations could access the fund in terms of building housing development. So it was kind of the way the thing was set up has favoured some of the developments that are being referred to in the city centre. The reason why lots of loans have been let out is because once those loans are being repaid, Paul and I will be able to redirect that money to more affordable housing schemes. So I know it's a complicated answer, but this fund that was given to us, £300 million, it's largely now been all let out to build schemes that vary, to be honest. Some of them are more high-end schemes. But once the money has been let out and the loans are being repaid by those organisations, we then have full flexibility to take that money that's being repaid and put it into other housing schemes. And Paul and I are quite clear that we will move away from city centre schemes and fund affordable schemes in all 10 boroughs of Greater Manchester, homes for social rent and for affordable rent. And that's the commitment that we're giving.
I interviewed Jeremy Corbyn in August, and he said, we were talking about housing, a big issue obviously that he's pushed right the political agenda to his credit, and he said that there's a danger of what's happened in London happening in places like Manchester and Salford, where he called it social cleansing. Effectively, people are completely priced out of where they live. He says he looks in his borough in North London where people are forced out because developers come in and build private, what they invest in is private apartments and expensive apartments, and rent is going up. If you look at the stats, £10,000 flats are currently being built in the city centre. Virtually all of them are privately owned. They're not social housing, they're not affordable housing. Do you think the city centre, the city council in Manchester and in Salford should do more to make sure that there is affordable housing and there is social housing when they say to developers, bring in your money and build these new buildings?
Well, what I would say is collectively, and I'm talking there, the 10 councils plus the Greater Manchester Combined Authority and me as Mayor, we need a plan to solve the housing crisis. That's what we need. We need a 10-year plan to build the homes, to deal with that figure that Paul mentioned, 84,000 people on housing waiting lists across our 10 boroughs. And I don't think we've had enough focus on building affordable housing in all of our 10 boroughs. So that's where as Mayor, and Paul as lead on this, that's where we want to turn all of our attention. You know, as I say, there's a reason why those buildings are being built in the city centre. It was because of the nature of the fund we were given by the government.
But do you think the City Council, Manchester in particular, has done enough? Because there's obviously been a rush to get as much investment as possible to build this fantastic city. Manchester has become, and Salford is kind of, I think there's a question later about Salford kind of being swallowed up by Manchester and the obsession with becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. That's a point someone made. Do you think that the councils have done enough to make sure there is affordable housing for people? Forget the government for a second.
Well, I opened one yesterday, to be fair to them. I mean, you know, I think people see the big schemes in the city centre. I was in Burnage yesterday, opening a new scheme, an affordable scheme. Paul was there as well. You know, a number of units. They don't get the same attention, do they, as the big things in the city centre? But to be fair, there is a lot of building going on across the Manchester local authority area of more affordable housing. So it's a mix, isn't it? But there's a reason why you've seen a kind of rush to those developments that we're seeing, that you're referring to, and it's because of this fund. But the quicker we get the money out the door, the more money we can bring back in to fund other developments across Greater Manchester. So there is a reason why that has come first. It's the way in which we were given this fund by the government.
There's a question up here, I think, on this topic. Just say your name as well before you...
Hi Andy, my name is Caroline and I'm from Salford, Swinton area. My question to you now, we've got a petition in against new build houses where we live, and you're talking about affordable houses. Now, the problem we've got is transportation, we've got pollution problems, there's no access roads, nothing. So what we're trying to do is, how do we propose and stopping people on building on, and trying to gain access to this, access to build on this piece of land?
Yeah. Well, I think what you're touching on there is the debate we were all having about the spatial framework, the planning framework across Greater Manchester. And you may remember that I said I wanted it to be rewritten and fundamentally kind of rethought, because I thought it was going straight to the green belt and wasn't going to a brownfield first approach. The problem, as I see it, with development in recent times is it's become too developer-led. So the developers are almost dictating to where they want to go, rather than kind of public sector saying, hang on a minute, this is the best place to build, and these are the sites that we think are more sustainable because they're more linked to the transport infrastructure. Accommodation there. Towns like Leigh, which I represented for 16 years, they're not going to be the retail destinations that they once were. So what I would like to see is more higher density development in places like that, more closely linked to transport, so that we can have more sustainable housing development going forward. For me, if you'd kind of followed the logic of that first draft of the spatial framework, we would have had a vision of Greater Manchester which was decaying town centres surrounded by urban sprawl, with cars gridlocked on the road and the air quality getting worse, and it wasn't a good enough vision of Greater Manchester for me to put my name to, and that's why I didn't, and it's why I said I want to see this thing fundamentally rewritten. So we're on with that now, and there's a kind of substantial rebalancing going on towards town centres. Tomorrow I'm hoping to prove a plan I've put forward for what I'm calling a town centre challenge. I'm inviting all 10 of our boroughs to nominate a town that they want me to take a focused look at as mayor to try and new life into them, and particularly bring more higher density residential development into them. Because if you bring those younger people into the smaller outlying towns of Greater Manchester, people in their 20s and their 30s, they'll then want more bars, more coffee shops. Well, you'll bring different forms of life into those towns, won't you? And you'll begin to revitalise them. And I think that's where we should start, in my view, rather than immediately going straight to the green belt and building there.
Get your bids into Paul for your town that you want Andy to focus on in Salford. You mentioned housing, and part of obviously building more houses is to make sure there's a proper transport system that gets them from the house to anywhere worth going to. And there's lots of questions. We've had lots and lots of questions about transport, and we've had two here tonight, which I'll come to in a minute, which is Hayley and Mark. But there's also a question from Twitter using the hashtag AskAndyGM. Ernst and Deb. No guessing where she's from. What can you do to improve public transport in underserved areas?
Yeah.
Which is a similar question to what we've been asked here. So if we can have the questions off Hayley and Mark. Hayley first, over here, and Mark is here around. Well, is Mark here?
We've got Transport for Greater Manchester here, so any difficult ones will be going straight over to them.
Ask Andy unless you can't answer it.
Yeah.
Hi Andy, my name's Hayley.
Hi Hayley.
I'll ask both of our questions if that's okay.
Go for it.
So my question is predominantly around public transport. So it's very interesting to hear that First Manchester are here. Public transport across Greater Manchester is expensive, complicated, unreliable and untransparent. It impacts on people's home and work lives, and in some cases prevents people from getting a job or sustaining a job. There is regular traffic chaos within the city, and the city centre often grinds to a complete halt. How do we tackle it?
So between Hayley, Mark and Deb, we've got a lot of questions about transport there. So
I think it's said with feeling in it when you live on the M602 and near Regent Road. I think I know that you know these issues better than anybody. But to be honest, congestion's getting worse everywhere, isn't it? I think we all feel it. Journeys that used to take 20 minutes are taking 40, aren't they? It's a real problem. And partly you tackle it through what I was saying before, by not just building more and more houses alongside the big roads, build houses that are linked to public transport. But actually, how do you get this transport system working? You are absolutely right in what you say. This is a confusing, expensive system. But to be absolutely fair to Transport for Greater Manchester, this isn't of their making. The biggest problem is the bus system that we've got, because the bus system will always have to be the backbone of the public transport system. Yes, I'm going to mention it. I'm going to go back to the mid-80s. Margaret Thatcher deregulated the buses. Didn't do it in London, by the way. London kept a regulated bus system, but everywhere else had to have a complete market free-for-all, and that's what we were given. And what it led to was just a complete kind of chaotic system of bus operators basically doing what they want, only doing the routes that they want, charging what they want, not having systems that integrate with ticketing, so you can't have standardised ticketing systems. That is what we've had for 30 years. And you can see what has happened. In 1985, Bob Morris from TFGM will correct me if I've got these figures wrong, but I don't think I have, there were around 390 million bus journeys taken in Greater Manchester in 1985. Last year, that had gone down to just over 200 million. So the number of people using the buses has halved in those 30 years because they've become too expensive, they're not serving the more isolated areas, and it's confusing because they're all got different colours and all the rest of it. We have now got the power to re-regulate the buses. The 10 leaders of Greater Manchester rightly demanded it as one of their kind of key negotiating points in the devolution deal. So we now have the power to do something about it. And the best thing I can say to you is we will be using the powers that we've just got through a new bill that's gone through Parliament to bring some sanity back to the bus system in Greater Manchester and run it in the interest of the public rather than private profit.
In terms of the question about city centre chaos, in terms of traffic, I mean, I live in the city centre, and I've noticed in the 5 years I've lived in Manchester, it's got a lot worse. And not just in the city centre, around the city centre, it's increasingly difficult. As mayor, and I think this is the question, the overarching question of everything people are asking is, what can you actually do? what powers do you have to make people's lives better when it comes to transport?
Direct power over the buses, and we will be using that power, and that will take a couple of years, 3 years maybe, for that to kind of start to really be felt, but that will be coming through. I would like personally to see much better quality cycling infrastructure. London has proven that if you invest in safe, segregated cycling lanes, people will use them. And that is the right investment on any level. If you think of people's health, if you think of the environment, if you think of the cost of travel, it's got to make sense for us to have a higher quality cycling infrastructure. I'm looking at issues like taxi regulation. There are a lot of taxis on the road, some of them not from Greater Manchester. I think there's a case to do something there. We are thinking about whether businesses could stagger the working day. You know, could they offer people the ability to start a bit later rather than... we do have a very 8 till 9, 5 till 6 kind of rush hour system, don't we? And whether there's answers there. We've got a consultation ongoing at the moment where TFGM have been asking the public to send in views on congestion. So we're open to suggestions, and we're going to bring forward a congestion plan. No one thing is going to solve it, to be honest. It's not going to be one simple silver bullet. It's going to mean a bit of action on a lot of levels will actually slowly make the problem a bit better than it is. That's probably the best answer I can give, the most truthful answer I can give.
Before we move on, does that answer your question? Do you feel like that's been answered? Is there anything you want to come back on?
No, I'm just really pleased to hear that we are going to use kind of like the bus regulation, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just really pleased to hear that we are going to use kind of like the changes in the regulations about buses, because I totally agree. Totally agree about that. And yeah, I think it is some outside the box thinking as well, because I actually think it was your idea, Andy, about looking at some of the canals and how we kind of like maybe use them as kind of like cycleways and things as well. And yeah, just some outside the box thinking maybe.
A couple of questions in the middle, I think, here.
Well, we've got Chris Boardman advising us on cycling, and he's looking at that infrastructure that we've got to see if we could turn more of that over to cycleways.
Thank you. Hi, Andy. The points you're making...
What's your name, sorry, sir?
It's Andy Connolly. I'm a local resident who lives around here, part of a group that is fighting to protect green space. It will not have a significant impact on the congestion. So I drove back from Piccadilly today to here, 6 miles, 40 minutes, and that's half term. So that's 9 miles per hour. Now, under the Greater Manchester Spatial Plan, Salford is expected to deliver over 30,000 houses over the plan period. And there's something like 2,000 within a mile or two of this site. So if you think of those additional properties and the additional traffic, what's going to be the impact on the roads? And also you'll be aware of the publication in the Lancet last week of the study on deaths caused by predominantly road pollution. How many deaths are being caused in Greater Manchester, and what we're going to do? I share your concerns that you haven't got definitive tools that you can put forward to have a significant impact, and I can't see that any of the things that you've mentioned will have a major impact. You can improve cycle paths, but they won't give a safe route for most cyclists to get 5, 6, 7 miles to work. So that will have a very minor impact on some people, but what you're going to do that's going to be substantial in affecting the congestion issue and the air quality and the health issues.
Yeah. Well, I think, you're right to say about planning isn't going to solve it. Of course not, because we're talking about building more homes. I'm talking about having a planning framework that is sustainable and doesn't make the problem of congestion a whole lot worse. In my view, the first draft of the spatial framework would have made the problem a whole lot worse, and that's why I've asked for it to be rewritten. I'm not going to sit here tonight and say it's going to be easy. Part of it is the north of England needs a much fairer share of investment in our transport infrastructure so that we have quality rail services of a kind that they expect in London. You look at our rail service, they're not good enough, are they, to tempt people out of their cars? They're very expensive, they're packed out, clapped out trains, not good enough. So that's part of it. But don't dismiss the buses argument. That halving of bus usage over those 30 years, pretty much, that has put a lot more cars on the road. And you have to get a bus system here integrated with Metrolink, so they operate effectively as one system, I think to begin to sort of turn this tide around, a much higher quality, integrated, more affordable public transport system. I'm not going to sit here tonight and pretend any of it's going to be easy, it's just waving a magic wand. It will be difficult, given the housing growth that we also need to achieve. But as Paul said, we need to try and do these two things together in the most integrated way we can manage, and building where we can most sustain the extra population.
We've got 3 questions on this. We've got a gentleman here, got a microphone here, and a microphone over here when you finish. So keep your answer questions relatively short, and same for the answers if that's all right, because we're 3 till 9 o'clock, so we want to get as many of you in as possible.
Hi Andy, it's Will Patterson here. How you doing?
Good, thanks, Will.
Basically, to follow on from that question, really, and to actually link it to the answer you gave on the benefit system as well, when we talked about making work pay. We've got a public transport system that really doesn't do that at the moment, particularly in terms of the rail network and to a less degree Metrolink, when you've got the peak fare levels at the moment, and anyone who's commuting has to pay an extra levy effectively for doing so. We've effectively got a congestion charge on our trains and our trams at the moment, and that's making work less affordable for people to a large degree. And also at half term, what we're seeing is that the evening peak time fare, it's not discouraging young people from maybe sort of changing their plans for the day and going back to their towns earlier. It's just making them pay more for having a day out in Manchester. So what can we do really to actually stop putting people off using our rail network with these exorbitant fares, and actually have a system that stops trying to restrict demand on public transport and actually tries to meet it instead?
That was not a short question. You answer it with a short answer, and then we'll go over here and put the microphone over here. I'm only joking, Will, I'm only joking. And the microphone over here as well. If you answer that for us, Andy. Yeah,
well, it's good to see Will. For those who don't know, Will was the Green candidate in the mayoral election and spoke very powerfully and passionately on all of these issues, and we agree a lot, don't we? I think we would all benefit, in my view, from a renationalised rail system. I think that would make travel more affordable for people. Just on that, it's not just the kind of daily commutes here. How could a young person with a job interview in London for Greater Manchester, if it was early morning, possibly afford to get down to that interview, given the cost of travel on Virgin? The system isn't fair, is it? It's very excluding in terms of who can use it. We've got to turn that around. I mean, the powers we've got will allow us to create a much better fare structure in Greater Manchester. In London, for instance, a bus journey is, I don't want to get this wrong, it's about £1.50. Yep. Flat kind of charge. That's how much it costs. Now, I'm not saying we can necessarily do that, but that's what they are able to achieve, because bus usage is so much higher as well. So it's about getting people on the buses, because the more people that use them, the more you can bring fares down, can't you, as well? It's about having a kind of daily cap as well. Can you have a ticketing system that limits what people can spend in a day? At the moment, people can use buses and Metrolink and spend a lot in a day, but you don't actually get that kind of benefit of integration that comes from running the two systems in an integrated way. So we're looking at all of those things, Will. As I say, it's all a challenge, but you can hold me to account on this. Public transport in Greater Manchester will get better in the next 3 to 5 years. It's going to take time to put the plans in place. I am going to deliver the free bus pass for 16 to 18-year-olds, because, to be honest, you've got to get them as users of buses earlier on in their life so that they become bus users in their 20s and their 30s. We've got to turn that whole thing around, that decline in bus usage. You've got to kind of really kind of turn it around. It won't be easy, but we're going to do it.
Question over here.
Hello, Andy. I'm Nathan. In light of what the gentleman's saying about cars, pollution, the Mayor of London was talking about a charge of £10 for the cars that do the most polluting. Would that be something that would be considered for Manchester to be introduced?
Good short question.
Short answer, no. No, we've been there, haven't we, with the congestion charge debate, and people would just see it coming back in another guise as a pollution charge. Without a scrappage scheme that's fair to people from the government, I don't think you can just put a charge on people, because, as Will said, some people have to. Public transport's not good enough for some people here in Greater Manchester, so they're stuck to using their car to get to work, and that would just be a straight tax if they've got an old car. So look, we're not the same as London, and I don't think we should go down that path. The reason the congestion charge went down, I think, all those years ago was public transport isn't there for people as an alternative to the car as it is in London. So, as I say, some people here have no choice. And if you're going to charge them either a congestion charge or a pollution charge, it's just a straight tax on them. And I just don't think it's fair to do that. So I'll give you a straight answer, no, because I'm not in the business of punishing people who are just trying to make ends meet. It's hard enough, as Paul said, if they're on 0 hours contracts or part-time work. It's not really my job to be making it even harder for them right now.
Final question on this section down here.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi,
Diana. It's a question really on behalf of Amber. How are you going to make it more accessible? We have a train station near our house she cannot use because she's a wheelchair user. We go out, there is one space on the bus. We don't really like feeling like an inconvenience, and it's really difficult sometimes, isn't it, Amber?
Oh, God. It's so heartbreaking, that, isn't it, that you feel that's how you're treated. And I think, again, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, half of the train stations in Greater Manchester, get your head around this for a minute, half of our train stations are not wheelchair accessible. In this day and age. Scandalous, absolutely scandalous. And it's why Transport for Greater Manchester rightly have made a bid to the government to say, look, you've failed. You're not looking after, you're not making your stations accessible to all of the people of Greater Manchester. You shouldn't be allowed to run them anymore. We should do it. So we've made a bid to have the control of train stations devolved to Greater Manchester. And sadly, as they are at the moment, Chris Grayling has said no to that. So we've gone back to them with a kind of smaller group of 10 to 12 stations to begin with. But honestly, the fact that you feel like that, they should sit here and listen to you, Amber, and sort of, defend the situation where we've got half stations without any lifts or wheelchair accessible facilities. It's frankly a scandal that is the case. But more broadly as well, we aren't able to insist on ramps on our buses. Again, because the bus operators can call the shots. So through these new powers we've got, I would be looking at wheelchair ramps should be standard on all buses in Greater Manchester, not waiting for 4 to go past before you can get on one. And also for people who are blind or visually impaired, having those announcements on the buses, when you come into the next stop. That should be a standard as well, in my view. That is what I'm talking about in terms of a modern, accessible, good public transport system. And your question, I just wish government ministers were here to hear how it feels to be you trying to use the train stations in Greater Manchester.
I've got a very, very quick question, if you can, here on transport before we move on. I want to get a couple of comments from people watching on Facebook as well.
Hi, my name's Helen from a community, mental health community support group in Ireland. I just wanted to know, can we not utilise the waterways? This is take the congestion, take all these heavy transport lorries off the road in the outer towns and stuff, and take, that'll take the congestion down. Yeah. To me that seems like a simple solution, is utilise the waterways, the canals.
Thoughts on that, as briefly you can, Andy?
Well, I think that's a really good idea. I think we have licensed a passenger, they call it a waxy, don't they, a water taxi, which is operating around Salford, I think, with Media City as well. More freight, though, I think is what you're saying. The one thing I would consider, going back, as in Nathan's question, the one thing I would consider is introducing a ban on certain vehicles in areas where air quality is worse. So what I'm talking about there is an HGV ban in certain parts of GM, making them not go the quickest route, but go round and avoid some of the areas where air quality is worse. So that is something, an air quality exclusion kind of zone. That is one thing I would look at. But I think you're right, there's a case to shift much more freight to, our waterways are underused at the moment, and I think we would all like to see more on there.
A few comments in from the Facebook and Twitter feeds. Eric Smith, quite a specific one this, but I'll put the point anyway. He would like to know when side roads and some main roads are going to be properly repaired. He lives in Wythenshawe, the roads are bad. He uses his bike and says it's damaged his bike, and can he claim compensation? The main point is quality of the roads. Again, as short as you can, Andy. Or quality of the roads, are they good enough?
That's where I do the old politician hospital pass to a leader of, I think that highways is not the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. But to be fair to our councils, they have had so many cuts that they are struggling to maintain the fabric of the highways, and so I sympathise, but that is a challenge. Here we go, Paul. I don't want to put you on the spot.
In 20 seconds.
In 20 seconds.
That's
I think
always the challenge for a
actually,
politician.
ITV did a league table of road quality in Greater Manchester, and
Very
Salford
good,
came
wasn't
out on top, so I'm quite happy about
All right, I'm giving you the right question then.
Take the mic off, Paul.
There's a really important point here, and that is about austerity and local government cuts. We have to make choices between where we spend our money every year. Since 2010 in Salford, we've seen a loss of 186 million from our revenue budget. 47% of our budget has been taken away from us. Next year, we have to find another 11.7 million pounds out of our revenue budget. And what we're seeing, certainly in children's services and adult social care, is those budgets just growing out of control in terms of how we respond as an organisation to poverty and the consequences of poverty within the city. So, for me, the choice is people services, and I'll be honest about that. I'm more interested in putting money into looking after kids in care and our elderly within our city than I am about filling in potholes on our roads, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. But the people who are forcing to make these decisions on local councils is government austerity. And I've given you the stats there in terms of Salford's budget. Okay. But if you play this out across the whole of Greater Manchester, you quickly realise how much money has been taken out of Greater Manchester by this Tory government, which is absolutely disgraceful and scandalous, in my opinion.
Let's get the next question. Andrew Green. Is it Andrew here? Andrew on the front row here. Question from Andrew.
Evening, Andy. I come representing a community self-help, mental health and emotional health and physical health help group. And we wanted to ask the question that states the fact that the farther you live away from the city centre, the more diluted the support, funding and services actually become. As residents of Earlham, we see the impact that this has on our community and would like to know, is there anything in the pipeline to address these issues, and if not, what could we do collectively to address and reshape this never-ending gap in our society?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question. It's a good question. When it comes to the health service, what we want to do is not just see always more and more centralisation of services. We want to move to an approach where more is delivered in the community, rather than just in the borough, but in localities of around 30,000, 50,000. So in places like Eccles or Lee, much more community-based provision. That's the direction that we're going in. You know, the health service, it's 70 next year, and in those 70 years, it's been largely often a hospital treatment service where, you know, we haven't supported people in the home, and then we've ended up just looking after them in the hospital bed. As we get into the ageing society, you can't carry on doing it in that way. You have to provide much more preventative support in communities to support people where they live. And that's very much the direction of travel that's going on in Greater Manchester. You know, it will take time to build it everywhere, but you know, we want to see investment in communities rather than everything always kind of being retrenched. I mean, hospital services, specialist services will have to be provided in that way. But here in Salford, and David Dalton is here, who runs Salford Royal, you know, you have actually pioneered a new way of integrating hospital and community provision. And I think, you know, there is a lot here that kind of points the way to the future of healthcare, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, I take on board everything that you say there. I think one of the main driving things behind that question was, how do we, the people, actually get heard and get involved in this, so opposed to it being something that's done to us, it's something we do together, co-produce, crack on with it. Yeah. How do we do that?
Yeah, well, it's a really good question. I think it starts with empowering people, doesn't it, to get what they need from the system rather than just getting one size fits all. I think it starts with carers, putting them at the heart of the system as well. They're always the forgotten part of the system. I like this idea of social prescribing. I don't know if you've heard about that. 100%. So rather than GPs just kind of throwing medication at people, you start to provide instant access to debt advice or housing advice or bereavement counselling. You know, you begin to get a health service that supports people in a different way in their own locality.
If we have identified that in our community and collectively come up with a long list of solutions, but we still don't know where or who to go to engage in actually being part of fixing our broken community.
Yeah.
We don't know what to do.
Well, you could come to me and talk to me about that, because I do have a...
You'd be sorry about that one.
No, I won't be sorry about that. Let me just tell you something very... I know Dan wants to move on, but let me just say one other thing.
I'm trying to get a microphone over here.
We're talking about a place-based approach across Greater Manchester. So, starting in communities and working with communities, not doing two, as you say. That's the direction of travel here. So that's point number one. But then point number two is, we also want a different relationship with the community and voluntary sector. And it's not one where the NHS or the statutory sector says we know best and we'll tell you how it's got to be. It's one where it's a partnership of trust, where they're equals. And we move away from this approach where they always give project funding or short-term funding, but give community organisations like yours long-term core funding to contribute as equal players in the health of the local population. So
sustainable.
More sustainable. We're not getting that. We're going to have to get more from the community and voluntary sector if we want to rise to the challenges that we have, that Paul was touching on. And that means giving them the stability to really maximise their contribution. So organisations like yours, the idea is that we will give much more long-term funding arrangements to.
Thank you.
We've got a question here and a question over here as well.
Thank you. My name's Anne, and I work for Unison. And one of the things that I remember you saying, Andy, was that you were looking at a health and social care service, not just a health service. And that fits in with all the community stuff about the carers, the people who are being cared for. We know how important that is. In Salford, the home care workers, who are so important now to making sure people stay out of hospital, have just been given a 10% pay rise, which is down to the Mayor of Salford and the branch in Salford as well, the Unison branch. But there is more that can be done. I just wondered what you're going to do to actually continue that across Manchester.
Well, this is a passion of mine, as you know, and I feel very, very strongly about this. We've got a situation in social care where councils are underfunded and they've been forced to cut back, and it's left us with a system of 15-minute care visits where the staff aren't paid the travel time between the 15-minute visits. They're on 0 hours contracts. How can you give security to the person you're caring for if you don't have it in your own life and you're not treated properly yourself? It's not going to happen, is it? And therefore, because of that poor system, a 15-minute visit doesn't stop somebody who's at risk of going into hospital, falling ill and going in. And so we end up spending hundreds. We don't spend a few pounds well in their home, but then we spend thousands of pounds when they're stuck in a hospital bed for days, if not weeks, on end. And this is what David and others and I have been talking about over a number of years. You've got to turn that whole system around and start in the home with proper support there. And it's why organisations like Salford Royal have begun to employ some of their own social care staff, because we're going to move in this direction where we are incentivising good home-based care. I want to end that 15-minute visit culture and that 0 hours culture in social care. The people who look after other people's parents, in my view, should be the people we support most in society. What a thing that is to do, to look after someone else's mum and dad. And yet, the system we've got at the moment says it's the lowest of the low. You know, it's lower than working in fast food because you don't get the travel time between the 15-minute visits. You're not even on the minimum wage. It's so wrong. It's unbelievable. We have a bid going to the government as part of the budget where we are saying we want in Greater Manchester this to be one system now. We want to bring social care fully into the NHS family and treat the social care workforce as part of the same team, where we respect them with NHS standards when it comes to pay terms and conditions. Because if you invest in quality there, you will save more money on unnecessary hospitalisation. So, you know, you're asking the right question. We're going to put this bid to the government. We're going to hopefully agree it tomorrow as Mayor and leaders together, and then we're going to kind of ask the government to make Greater Manchester a pilot for the reform of the funding of health and social care. And if we get that, we are then going to completely deliver a new model where we start in the home with a multidisciplinary team around the individual and get rid of this absolutely awful 15-minute visit culture. And we banish use of the phrase bed blocker to describe older people. You know, the system is failing them, and yet currently we're labelling them as though they're the problem. We need a system here based on respect for older people, but also respect for the people who care for them.
Before we bring in David, I think, and also got 2 or 3 questions as well. The question that I suppose keeps coming back, which is that a lot of people ask a lot of questions over different subjects, and obviously health is a big one for people. It seems to me that a lot of the questions, you answer a lot of questions by saying, we're kind of going to get together and go to the government and say we want this to be devolved, or we're going to go to the government and say, can you give us this? Do you kind of accept that there are lots of things you can't do? As mayor, your job is very much kind of voice piece. You can push and you can shove and you can ask the government, but actually the role you have isn't particularly powerful in some areas.
Not necessarily, Dan. It's not stopped me. I made a commitment to end rough sleeping by 2020, and I stand by it, even though I didn't have the money to deliver it when I first made that commitment. I've said I'm going to put 15% of my own salary into a mayor's homelessness fund, and I've set that up, and we've raised over £50,000 now. I'm going to carry on doing that for as long as I'm mayor, and I want to unlock the contribution from other people. If I'm doing it, I want other people to contribute. Some of the things, we shouldn't just always think, well, it's got to be taxed, and we've got to badger the government for it. People in Greater Manchester are naturally generous. They want more to be done. They are willing to contribute, either their time or sometimes their money, whatever it might be. And it's my job as mayor to kind of unlock that as much as I can, to deal with... it's no good to people who are homeless or sleeping rough for me to say, oh, it's all the government's fault. I mean, what good is that to them? So we've still got to kind of make those arguments as well as trying to do something. And when it comes to health and care, David Dalton is here. Maybe David wants to say something about this. We've moved a long way already through devolution. This isn't just about something that we might do down the line. The Greater Manchester health and care system is integrating before our eyes. It is becoming much more about a whole person approach, physical, mental, social care delivered as one. We're not there yet, but we are significantly down that path. What we're saying is the pilot would allow us to go take a much further stride down that path. So it's a mixture, Dan, to be honest. We're going to try and do whatever we can with what we've got, but yeah, we will always need to kind of push the government to help us go further. David, do you want to add anything at all?
If you wish me to. You've got a microphone there.
Yeah, put you right on the spot there, mate.
And then I want to get as many questions
but
as
I think it's good that you hear from your
your
local hospital chief exec.
So very quickly, I mean, let's understand that Salford began this about 15 years ago, of looking at how to develop its services out of hospital. And it's continued to do that, to make the investment that Andy has described, but having a different focus now on those neighbourhoods, of trying to identify who are the most vulnerable people, who are most at risk of having a health problem or a social problem, and then working with everybody who is in that neighbourhood, whether they're the doctor or the community nurse or the social worker, the pharmacist, the carers themselves, and the voluntary sector, to work in that neighbourhood to support those most vulnerable people. So if you go back 20 years, you'd see a very different service, one that was mainly hospital-based, as Andy was saying, and now we're breaking that down into these neighbourhoods. And I really hope that this bid goes forward from tomorrow to get that extra funding for the pilots that we wish to put in place. It would be great if it was accepted.
Question here.
Thanks, David. Thank you.
And we'll try and get quite a few of you.
Hi, my name's Sid Williams. Andy, I love what you're doing with almost stepping out in faith and going, I don't have the budget yet to end rough sleeping, I'm going to go for it anyway. I know how you feel. My wife and I have done a whip round with family, and we've just bought what was Simon Cowell's X Factor tour bus.
Oh, right.
And I'm just kitting it out at the moment. I'm hoping
really?
to get launched in the winter here. It's got 14 beds, a little toilet,
really?
lounge in it, kitchen, all the rest of it. Working closely with existing organisations to try and fill that gap. And there's lots of people feeding, not many people giving people a bed, and then plenty of great organisations feeding people into housing. And I don't have the cash to do it, but I'm going to give it a go. Trust that it'll work out. And you were mentioning to this gentleman on the front that you would be willing potentially to meet with him and to sort of discuss ideas, and perhaps there'd be funding there. I don't know. I'd love to have a coffee with you sometime.
You can, and you can apply to the Mayor's Homelessness Fund, because it sounds as though what you're doing may well qualify for support through that. So think about that as well.
Okay. Thanks. Hands up for them. So we've got two mics. They're working very hard. Rachel and Smith are working very hard to get the mics to you. Let's go here, and Smith, pick one. Up to you. Smith holds his fate in your hands and all that.
Hello, hi Andy. My name is Martha, and I just wanted to make a comment and ask your view on the issue around integration of health and social care. as an ex-social worker and someone who's just come out of working in a hospital trust space, a big issue that I think has always been and is still around is the issue of going across boundaries of understanding. And I think that, for example, the neighbourhood model that we're talking about sounds really, really good. I think one of the real challenge is how do you get people to integrate across those disciplinary perspectives, because having left very recently a situation where there really is a kind of
a cultural difference.
Yeah. So, what is your view on sort of challenging that, for example, in health and social care education of new professionals?
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. This won't be done overnight. It's got to be a journey, and David describes it's already a journey that's got a significant kind of bit of distance behind it. My vision is of one system for the whole person. That is my vision. You know, a national health and care service, a service that can look after people's physical, mental, and social needs as one, and doesn't try and put them into silos. Or your social care over there and your physical and mental care over. That leaves people telling the same story to everyone who comes through the door. It doesn't work. So that's the vision. But I agree with you. There is history here. There's 70 years of NHS history where people have worked separately. The big problem is the funding differential. So social care, means tested and charged for, NHS free at the point of use. That is, until that's changed, they won't ever really fully speak the same language. So what we're doing here is trying to integrate the public money as best we can into one system. But I still believe, if you really want to make this work, and it may not be popular with everybody, I still believe the best way is to move social care fully to the NHS principle, which is everyone contributes for the care and then everyone is covered on a kind of we're all in it together basis. And I do still believe that the best way to do it is not to charge everybody through general taxation, but to ask everybody to make a contribution from what they leave behind. So it's 10% of what they leave behind. But by doing that, you create both an NHS-style social care system, but you allow everybody to protect 90% of what they've worked for. And nobody can do that in the current social care system. It gets wiped out by the costs of care. So I will make this argument until we see substantial change, because what we've got at the moment is the worst of all world. We had this phrase dementia tax in the election campaign. Well, we've got them already. They're called care charges. And some people end up paying £200,000, £300,000. This is a lifelong passion of mine to change this, and I'll never ever be quiet about it until we've got a system. Sorry, last point very quickly, Dan. We are not ready for the 21st century and the ageing society until we have a system that doesn't discriminate between people's physical and their mental needs. And I will, for as long as I'm in politics, argue for this. I want an NHS that supports people with dementia as well as it treats cancer. And until we can say that, we won't have a 21st century NHS.
Question up here. We've got a question here. Microphone.
Sorry about this, Andy. I'm from John from Open Door, homeless charity. Going back to homelessness, we've noticed on the streets that a lot of people are homeless because of bedroom tax, and there's a not a very big amount of flats or houses what are one bedroom, and on about housing as well. I live in South Manchester, and a lot of the houses have been taken over by house associations, and just recently they pulled down 10 blocks of flats, quite a lot of flats, over 100 flats, maybe more, and they were social housing, and now they've built houses and flats, but out of 184 properties, some are let to buy, and some are outright buy, and I think there's about 30 or 40 to rent social housing.
Yeah.
So I look at it this way: if they pull social housing down, they should replace it with social housing.
Yeah. We covered housing quite a lot, but if you want to answer that really briefly.
But I think I agree. That's what Paul and I are trying to work on. A much bigger supply of homes for social rent and affordable rent, but also one bed properties as well. There's a real shortage of them around all of our boroughs. Paul used the figure 84,000 people on waiting lists. That's the number. That's the scale of our problem. And we need a housing policy we won't be able to do it in 1 year or 2 years, but over a 10-year period, we need a Greater Manchester housing policy that is going to have an answer to that problem.
Okay. Question here. Plenty of you now with the Hands up. Some microphone. The lady here. Okay, cool. Go ahead.
Yeah, Terence Carver from Joint Veterans Alliance. We know and appreciate that a lot of work and a lot of effort has gone into getting the homeless off the streets of Manchester city centre. But it's not just Manchester city centre that suffers with people on the streets. We work in Salford. We have 40, 50 people a time turn up to our soup kitchens. What's being done to help the other boroughs and those that are rough sleeping that are not in central Manchester?
Again, briefly as you can, Andy. Pass the microphone behind you for me, if that's okay.
The fund that I've set up covers all of Greater Manchester, and the policy we're developing on both rough sleeping and homelessness is again about all of Greater Manchester. So, you know, please believe me, it's not all just about the city centre. We are seeking to provide support to organisations in all boroughs. You've got very good ones here. There's Caritas, I think, are doing a lot of good work in this space, and is it Emmaus as well? I mean, there's good organisations. We're here to support them as well. This is a problem that doesn't just sort of end in the city centre. This is all over Greater Manchester. Please believe me, you know, this is a GM-wide strategy that we're seeking to develop.
Just so before we've got 19 minutes to go. Lots of you are throwing your hands up at me, and I'm doing my absolute best to get all of you in. We've only got 2 microphones, so quick questions, quick answers. Let's do a bit of a quick fire round. And if you feel like your question's been answered, try not to answer it. Ask it. Question on here.
Okay, hi Andy, I'm Alison Page from Salford CVS. It's really good to hear you talk about investing in the voluntary sector 5 and 7 years, because I think one of the things that's demonstrated in all these conversations is the importance of all that ecosystem to addressing frontline challenges, whether it's from homelessness to rough sleeping to food banks to education to health. So in terms of social prescribing, I think that's fantastic. Unless we invest in that ecosystem, there'll be nothing to prescribe to, which I know you know, but the challenge also, as I'm sure Paul would say, is that the way local authorities have been battered, there is an inherent challenge. We're fortunate in Salford is that we've got the CCG, Anthony sitting behind me, they've invested £1 million into small grants to support the ecosystem. So I suppose I've got 2 questions for you really. The first is...
Cheeky, that is.
How you, I know, I'm dead cheeky.
Quick as you can.
Yeah, I've been waiting for... I always have 2 questions, I have 3 normally. The question is, how can you influence the adoption of small grants to support the ecosystem on a GM footprint? And my second question, by stealth, is how are you going to influence the promotion and trying to get providers to pay the accredited living wage, particularly for people who are delivering frontline health and care services?
Yeah, good questions. If cheeky ones, but still good ones. I think what you're saying is so right, though, about the ecosystem and every bit contributing, public, private, voluntary. That is the way to solve. These are massive problems we're talking about tonight. And if I just adopted the thing that Dan was alluding to before, of just saying, oh, it's all the government's fault, give us more money, that's not going to help the people of Greater Manchester, is it? So I am going to do a bit of that, but at the same time build out the capacity of our people and our communities. So how am I going to do it? In answer to your first question, we've signed a memorandum. The NHS in Greater Manchester has signed a memorandum with the community and voluntary sector to say we will give long-term core funding. And going forward, we're looking at developing an employers' charter where, particularly starting with our public bodies, we will require people to pay the living wage. So tomorrow, a paper goes through the Combined Authority that hopefully, if it goes through, Greater Manchester Combined Authority will seek accreditation as a living wage employer. And we want them to kind of, I think Salford are a living wage employer. We're starting to spread it out across the public sector and then through their contracting. So it's coming. It's not where it should be yet, but it's coming.
Question here.
Thank you. It's Gavin Williams, the Chief Executive of Trafford Carer Centre and part of a network of carers organisations. There is over 230,000 unpaid carers in Manchester that provide between 50 to 100 hours of unpaid care to a disabled person. My question really is what is the Mayor's commitment to promoting health and well-being for carers who are a silent workforce and actually bigger than any NHS organisation that delivers support in Manchester?
Yeah. Are you Gavin Williams? I have your question here. I was told you weren't here. Sorry, I apologise.
Well, it's a good question. I'm glad you are here to ask it, Gavin, because you're speaking for a lot of people. A lot of people who often don't have a voice, don't get seen sometimes by the mainstream services. They're just taken for granted. And we need to do something more. So the answer is we are on with doing something more. There's a consultation being underway in Greater Manchester around carers and putting carers at the heart of the system. And the proposals, I think, are going to be published in January, which will be the commitments that we make to carers as part of this remodelled system that David has been describing. So, again, yes, I'm here to be held to account. It won't solve everything, but it will at least say, well, look, talk about unlocking capacity. Start with that capacity that carers give. The way I look at it is, if the NHS does a better job of supporting people in the home, it might make being a carer more doable than it currently is. Otherwise, if you don't do a good job in the home, you leave too much of a burden on carers, and then they can't cope. So it's about getting a service that kind of works with carers from the off and makes it more of a doable kind of partnership.
Microphone
gives them guarantees of support.
We're here.
Hello, Andy. My name is Linda.
Hi, Linda.
The one thing you've not mentioned this evening is health tourism, and I think there would be a lot more money to go around if we really cracked on with this. And we are a national health service, not an international health service. And there are always going to be some people that will need help, but there are others that really are just taking the mickey. So I think all hospitals should have revenue officers that are able to claim all the cash back that we spend on people that are coming from other countries purely as health tourists.
Brief answer.
I mean, there are measures in place to be able to do that. I think, I think it's an area I don't disagree necessarily with the principle that if people don't have entitlement, that you have to find a way of covering the costs. Although I do say tread with care, because sometimes people present as an emergency case, and it's unfair to doctors to say, don't, it's
There will always be cases like that, but you can't have people just flying over here because they think that they're going to get a free
No, and there are rules in place where hospitals can recover that money, and I think there's more things have come in recently. The only thing I would say is, I don't know what David would say, you're talking a very small percentage of the overall budget of a hospital is lost. You're talking less than 1 or 2%, aren't you?
Less than that. It's less, far less than 1%.
Some newspapers would have us believe it was half of the NHS budget. It is an issue, but it is got to be seen in proportion with the rest, the entirety of the NHS budget.
Question here.
Hazel Beresford from G-Force. We started a brush and a brew in the doctor's surgery. And it's been a really good success where people are lonely, depressed, and the doctor prescribes these patients to come to us.
Makes them
but we can't get any funding. The doctor cannot get any funding. Where do we go for funding? We're not after millions of pounds, but we've got a lot of people, so much so that, because it's a brush, it's art therapy. Or if you just want to sit... no, not
what kind of brush?
Paintbrush.
Sorry, I was trying to work out.
Artist brush.
With a hairbrush.
Yeah. Or you can just have a drink and have a brew and have a chat.
A brush and a brew, okay.
And basically what it is we're full.
Yeah.
We were full this week, and we've got more people and no funding.
Personally, I think there's a big win for the NHS in embracing this notion of social prescribing. Low-level, everyday, human support that lifts people out of their circumstances, and
17
well, again, you can talk to me about that, and I'll see if we can open up those conversations, because we've been too much in a medical model where it's all been about medical commissioning, and sometimes you're kind of always about treating the patient and you lose sight of the person behind the condition. I believe in that passionately, and I want to see a proper system of social prescribing in Greater Manchester, because I genuinely believe that's going to be better for us all in the long run.
10 minutes to go. Question here.
Hi, Kerry Muldoon from Broughton Flood Group. Changing the questions a little bit for the floods. We're talking about in Boxing Day 2015.
Yeah.
We're having a lot of trouble trying to get all councils upstream from the GM together to work together. Salford Council, EA, no building on flood zone free areas, new developments that are getting built. need to have assurance that if they do get built on certain flood areas, that it's not going to implement other people of getting flooded social houses as such.
Yeah.
We need help with the Berry catchment and Rochdale, trying to get their council to work with us, even if it's slowing the flow down, anything. We just suffered almost 4, 5, 6, 7 flood alerts in the past 2 years. Last weekend was one.
Was it again,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like every time we get these flood alerts, it's major panic.
Yeah.
And we're all in social houses as well. People have got to understand if we do flood again, there's no houses for us to go to. There's going to be maybe 10, 20 social houses left.
I remember it. I bet Paul does and others in the room. I was in Boxing Day and I was in people's houses. I saw what happened. It was, devastating, wasn't it? It was worse here than it was. I just saw it on a smaller scale in Lee, but I know it was really devastating for people here. The Environment Agency did a report, didn't they, of all the investment is needed in Greater Manchester to kind of reduce the risk of a repeat. And I don't think the funding has been allocated yet to kind of put in place that overspill upstream to make Greater Manchester...
And that's what I mean. That was like 2 years ago. We're nearly talking 2 years ago.
Well,
now.
I'll give you a commitment tonight. I'll meet with the Environment Agency to hold them to account on that in terms of where are they up to.
Trying to get more than anything else, Radcliffe and Better Council to try and... With them people who got flooded up there, they've had a raw deal. They're still having a very bad raw deal.
Everyone
it's
did.
Not fair.
So you'll meet with the Environment Agency on her behalf?
There was a Greater Manchester report about investment that was needed to minimise the chances of a repeat, and I will meet them to see where we're up to, and I'll find some way of reporting back to you on that.
Okay. Question here?
Andy, I'm Barthélemy from Salford Refugee Link. We work with refugees and asylum seekers. My question is about the asylum the immigration case failed and they stopped their benefit. They don't have the right to work, they don't have accommodation, they don't have any income. Those people need to face or to afford their basic needs, how they can do it. We don't want those people to be doing like dodgy things, stealing, find themselves in prison or do crime or selling drugs. Do you got any plan for those people, how to support them? Because if the country cannot send them back to their own country.
The plan I wish I have I don't want to give you a very long answer because Dan won't, but if I could give you an outline plan. Greater Manchester, our 10 boroughs, have always taken refugees and asylum seekers, more so than anywhere else in the country. And I think that reflects very well on us in terms of the nature of people here. But our message should be to the Home Office, if we're to carry on doing that, we can't have the system that you're operating, because it doesn't... It creates more problems locally because it doesn't provide the support, and then people have to fall back on the council and for all the reasons that you say. So if we're to carry on working in the way that we have done, I think we need new commitments from the Home Office in terms of the way that they will they fulfil their side of the bargain with regards to the support that's provided, because at the moment it's as you say, it's not good enough. And it adds to the problems that we've got, and it's obviously terrible for those who are in those circumstances.
There's a question, the final question we had officially submitted, and we I don't think David Hickey's here tonight, is he? No, this is kind of one of the final questions, I think, official questions, and we'll see if any more comments. It's from David. Major businesses in Salford are rebranding themselves as Manchester. This is contributing to Salford losing its identity. Can anything be done to force those companies based in Salford to either use the name Salford or none at all?
Well, I mean...
Does anyone have sympathy with David's question? Is there a few right, there's a few people, I suspect they might. Paul put his hand up as well then.
Paul, I would be shocked if he didn't put his hand up, and obviously we could probably include the rugby league team, couldn't we, in this, although I think that threat has receded. I think it would have been a travesty to see Salford Reds renamed myself. Salford for me, I always have kind of felt there's a very distinct identity in Salford in terms of Salford people, and I want to see that protected and celebrated. It's a kind of part of the fabric of Greater Manchester, and I don't want to see us become, just because Manchester is the name and everyone then has to kind of fall in. Let's celebrate what it is to be Salford.
To play an unpopular devil's advocate, can you understand why the university, for instance, calls itself, I think, University of Salford, Manchester? And can you see why they're doing it? Manchester is such a huge brand, a global brand, and it is become that, because not just because of the city, the football teams and everything about it. Do you think if businesses in Salford feel they can make more money, or they can raise their profile and therefore create more jobs and create a better city, if they just nick the name of the city next door?
I've seen football clubs try and do this.
Is it harmless? I mean, football clubs rename their stadiums.
I'm a traditionalist on these matters. For me, it matters where you come from, your roots, what you're all about, your identity. It matters. And organisations come in just thinking that can be discarded because they're chasing some whatever. No, honestly, let's do a better job of promoting Salford and explaining it more confidently if that's needed. Paul and Jim are doing that already. Okay. But no, Media City Salford. I think that it's not Manchester, is it? The BBC wanted to kind of rename that, didn't they? Or didn't someone say at the BBC that they thought they were that Salford should be folded into Manchester, didn't they? I don't know.
I'm ITV, I don't comment on that.
yeah. You'd never say anything quite so, yeah.
Unless they want to give you a job, it pays better. Two final questions. One here, you've already answered, sir, and one over here. One there and one there. You first, sir, and then you second.
Hi, Andy. It's been very interesting tonight, I must say. You've covered quite a lot of subjects. We've gone from the homeless people to the national health and the housing crisis, etc. It's good to see that somebody is standing up, because leaders lead and followers follow. I'm sure that you'll find that out soon. Now, we've got the homeless people. We've not spoke about the spice. We've not spoke about that and the epidemic and the drugs in Manchester. There's big problems with drugs in Manchester. And would you be prepared to look at a new way of dealing with this? And in particular, with regards to cannabis, would you look at perhaps decriminalising cannabis? Because cannabis at the moment is in the hands of the criminals, and that itself is criminal.
So legalise cannabis, yes or no?
No, I'm afraid.
That's the question.
Decriminalise, not legalise.
Oh, right.
Decriminalise it. Apologies, decriminalise cannabis.
Medical use, would you?
I mean, in government, we did reclassify, if you remember, and I'm not sure. I'm looking at. Yeah, and if I'm being honest with you, no is the answer. Although I understand what you're saying, in that there were legal highs and spice all of a sudden got made illegal, and then it caused a lot more. I get your point, I do, but my worry is with young people. If you kind of send a message to them that cannabis usage is, you can do a lot of damage to your development if you.
Child needs now to buy cannabis is a £10 note.
I think you've got your answer, sir.
I'm sorry if it's not.
1 minute to go. One question from you, and then I want one final question. That's all right with you, Andy?
Yeah.
I'm Steve. My question is for Andy. I'm just trying to find out, is there any strategic plan for the BME community in Greater Manchester? We speak a lot about diversity and all that, but then how do you actually involve the BME community in mainstream activities, service and all that? Yeah. Because there's been issues in the past that if you go into every workforce, that the BME are quite underrepresented. Yeah. And there's also been studies carried out that BME are not well educated and all that. But I find that quite difficult to believe in the fact that I came to this country 17 years ago, and in the course of me being in this country, I've seen a whole lot of black and ethnic minority highly educated, but they never get to the real job they're actually trained to do in this country. Okay. Thank you.
I think we've got further to go, haven't we? I think I'm quite proud of Greater Manchester in terms of the way we are, the diversity we have. But you're right, it's not always represented in the top of our organisations or in the most prominent positions. And I think we've got further to go on that, no doubt about it. We're doing a review at the moment. Rishi Shori, leader of Bury Council, is leading a review on social cohesion. What more can we do to create a truly inclusive society? I think there are more things that we can do. I wouldn't want to give you any glib answers tonight, but it's certainly something that's on our agenda, and we'd want to talk and work with all communities to see what measures people would like to see.
Okay, my one final question to end, because being a journalist, I get one question, if that's okay with you. Of course, the Combined Authority meets tomorrow, and that's why we're here.
Yeah.
in Salford. One of the leaders of that council, of course, is the leader of Rochdale Council, Richard Farnell, who we saw obviously this week at the CSA inquiry. He's come under a lot of pressure, calls to resign today. Do you believe Richard Farnell should stay in his position? Do you think he should consider resigning as leader of Rochdale Council?
Well, the inquiry is revealing some matters that should concern us all. There's just no doubt about that. In terms of inquiries, I've always supported absolutely 100% truth and justice for victims of any failure or abuse where the state hasn't done its job. However, while I support that, I also fully support independent inquiries doing their work and not being receiving interference from somebody like me. So I'm afraid it is one of those where I say it's not appropriate for me to interfere in any way and say that this is my view, that the inquiry is asking the questions, it's going through the process, and it needs to be allowed the space to do its job and come up with its conclusions without me in any way undermining it. Although I would say the Deputy Mayor, Beverly Hughes, is here this evening, whose responsibility for policing and crime. She and I mean, Bev may want to say something very quickly on this. I mean, we will never in any way be complacent about any abuse of children, physical or sexual. And there were allegations later this year that there was still not enough being done to protect children. There were still issues around earlier police investigations into some of the issues that we had here. So I asked Bev to lead an assurance process to look just locally at what has been done, not just in Rochdale, but in all of our boroughs. So we need to be able to provide that reassurance to people that everything is being done to provide reassurance. So we will never shy away from asking the difficult questions. But in this instance, into the specific you asked me, Dan, the independent inquiry nationally needs to be able to do its job and come up with its conclusions.
I have a quick final word, Bev, before we finish. If you can do it as quickly as you can, because we are now past 9 o'clock and
okay,
I've broken
yes,
all the rules.
I'm surprised I've got to the end of the meeting without being asked to say anything else about policing and crime, and our Deputy Chief Constable's here as well and hasn't been called on. Just to say that Andy and I are absolutely committed to doing this exercise. There were some concerns expressed earlier in the year about what might still be the situation in parts of Greater Manchester in relation to child sexual exploitation. We, with the leaders across the 10 authorities and the chief executives, have put in place this review led by two very eminent experts, one a child protection expert, one a police authority, and we're going to see this to its conclusion. And whatever it reveals will be revealed, and we will act on it. That's our assurance.
Thank you, Bev. Well, Dan, can I just say something in just conclusion? I think on behalf of everybody here, thank you to you for giving up your evening and chairing it so well. So a huge thank you to you, Dan. But I just wanted to say thanks to all of you. Brilliant questions. Probably some of them have got better answers than others. I don't claim to have all the answers about everything, and in some cases I've given answers maybe that people didn't want to hear. But I'm here to try and be honest and be held to account as best I can. What I would just say is, in conclusion, is the fact that so many of you are here and taking an interest is really encouraging to me, because I think this kind of movement we've got to build around devolution, doing things genuinely differently in the way Greater Manchester likes to do, is what this is all about. Different relationship with the voluntary sector, different approach to our public transport, helping homeless people. This is what it's about. When I was running for this job, people would say, oh, it'll be a white elephant, it'll be irrelevant. But the fact that you're here kind of suggests to me that people are buying into it. Right. And the thing I just want to say in closing, Dan, is that the more people that do engage and kind of get interested and challenge me, yes, but kind of contribute to the debate, the stronger we will make this change around devolution in Greater Manchester, and the more we'll make the argument to get things like the DWP budget under our control, train stations under our control. That's the way I want to see this. The more you get involved, the more power you will give me to kind of go and make the argument to get even more things under our own decision making here in Greater Manchester. So, please see it that way. We've got, whatever your views in politics nationally, it's becoming more dysfunctional at the national level, and we've got this chance to break out of that and kind of come up with better answers to all of the things that we're discussing here tonight. You know, things that basically Westminster has failed to do. My view is Westminster has failed the north of England. You know, it's given us a housing crisis. That's why I left it. Simple. It's really simple. It's why I left it. It's failed young people in terms of skills and education. It's failed people in terms of housing. It's given us a housing crisis. It's certainly failed older people, as we were just talking about social care. It's allowed that broken system of social care to develop. They haven't come up with the answers, and this is the best chance all of us will ever get to come up with better answers. But there will be stronger answers if we do it collectively, as someone said before, if we write these answers together. And that's the spirit that I want to build, and it's why I'm doing these events. So it's really encouraging for me to see so many people here. Thank you very much for giving me your time. You know, but also I would just say in closing is this is our time. This is our time. It's the best chance we'll ever get to kind of break out of this London-centric culture that we have in our country. And actually, the more that people hear the common sense voice of the people of Greater Manchester coming up with the best answers, I think you will see this country begin to change, and the voice of the North will get stronger. So, you know, thanks for taking a part tonight. I hope you found it useful. You know, next time maybe I'll have more answers to some of the things that people are raising. But you know, I just wanted to say that it's really encouraging. We're going to carry, Bev and I and Paul and others, we're going to carry on working with you in this way, and we're hoping to make this a moment of real change for the people of Greater Manchester. So thank you very much.